Good afternoon, everyone. This is the British Interplanetary Society, the West Midlands branch. We have 104 registered for today's talk, and 50% are members, 50% non-members, so it's the highest proportion of non-members we've got. So you're very welcome. I hope you enjoy it. And 33, one third of you, almost exactly, are new to West Midlands Group events. So welcome. If everybody could now mute themselves, apart from Mark Perman. Mark?
Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see so many people here today. So if we can move on to the next slide, Bob.
Okay, yeah.
So the plan for the day, for those of you that haven't been to these before, my name's Mark Perman. I share the secretary duties with for West Midlands branch with Bob Stanton, who you just heard from. And the plan for today is pretty much what we always do these days. So quick welcome from me, and then we'll kick off with Mark Hempsell, another Mark, I'm afraid. Mark Hempsell, Missions with the Scorpion. And then there'll be a questions and answer session at the end. An additional announcement. For those people who are interested in setting up a British Interplanetary Society branch, or and specifically the BIS, the people involved interested in BIS North and BIS Scotland, please do stay on at the end of answers. Steve Salmon, who is the council member responsible for branches, is supposed to be on this call. If he isn't, I'm not sure if he is. I looked down a minute ago, he wasn't there. But if he isn't, Rod Woodcock, who is also very interested in the branches, and he's a council member as well. So we can all have a bit of a chat and update you on where we are with that. So if you could move on, Bob. Just a brief plug for the BIS. We do great, for those of you who aren't members, great magazines. JBS is the journal. There's the Chronicle, which is the historical magazine, and Spaceflight, which is current topics. If you think you can write an article, please contact the editors. Bob, if you could move on. And then, being a member will get you videos, talks and lectures, symposia and conferences, cheaper prices when we're open for physical events. But there's lots and lots of stuff on the website which you can get if you're a member. There's also a monthly newsletter. There's the members area. There's all the social media, and you get the camaraderie of these type events. Bob? So, as you can tell, very keen to build the Interplanetary Society's membership. So if you're enjoying this sort of thing, if you want to meet others with a like mind, please do join the British Interplanetary Society. The magazines and the website are excellent. Move on, please, Bob. And with having said that, it's a great pleasure to hand over to Mark Hempsell for a talk I'm very much looking forward to. I've read his papers in the magazines, so I'm very much looking forward to this. Over to you, Mark.
Okay. Mark, if you are talking, you are muted. We can't hear you.
Sorry about that. I was saying hi, everyone. Not quite sure how the mute happened. I didn't do it. That was you, Bob. Just saying that this is a new talk. There's a little bit of new material in it. Hopefully you'll spot that. And it's tackling subjects I've not covered in the other talks. So suggest that we get on with it.
Great.
Hello, I'm Mark Hempsell, and I've been asked by Mark Perman if I would do a Scorpion lecture for the British Interplanetary Society West Midlands branch, and of course I'm delighted to oblige. This will be the third video lecture I have given to the BIS on the Scorpion General Purpose Transport Spacecraft concept. The first was on the engineering of the Scorpion, where I outlined the engineering feasibility, using it as an argument for how little we have moved things forward in the space infrastructure since Apollo, compared with, well, what we could have achieved. The second video was a lecture to the BIS Italia branch, where I'd address some of the comments that have been made about the Scorpion while making some wider points about the way we should be thinking about space infrastructure development. Both these videos are on the BIS's YouTube channel, which I would highly recommend you visit, as this is a veritable goldmine of space-related material. And please remember to subscribe and like and do all those other things that improve its media profile. So why a third lecture, apart from the obvious vainglory, self-promotion and general rampant narcissism? Well, it's because I don't think we got to the really interesting stuff in the other videos, which is what can you do with the Scorpion if you made it. So what we're going to do here is look at some of the missions the Scorpion can perform. But before we see what it can do, let's start with a recap of the Scorpion spacecraft and its capabilities. So this is the Scorpion. It is a transportation system for taking crew and payloads from low Earth orbit to anywhere in the space between Venus orbit and Mars orbit. And it has an operations centre that enables assembly and other operations comparable to the International Space Station. It has a pressurised cabin that can house a crew of 6, radiators to control the temperature, 4 large inflated tanks that carry the hydrogen propellant, the provisions to carry and handle cargo that could be many hundreds of tons, a capsule that acts as the ship's tender and a means of escape, and at the rear a Serpent nuclear engine, which is the piece of magic that makes the Scorpion concept work. A key point to understand about the Scorpion is that it is designed to complement the Skylon spaceplane. It is built in orbit over 28 Skylon flights at an assembly facility in low Earth orbit. But although there needs to be an orbital station to build it, the Scorpion does not need a spaceport to operate, as the centre hub has all the fuelling and payload handling that are required to support the Skylon delivery flights that are needed to prepare for a mission. To cover the vital statistics, it is 107 metres long, 50 metres wide, and the basic vehicle has 620 cubic metres of habitable space. This is the equivalent of 2 or 3 family houses and is 2/3 the volume of the International Space Station. Although, if laboratory or logistic modules are added to the hub's berthing ports, this could end up being very comparable or even larger than the ISS. It weighs around 240 tonnes when it is unfueled and without cargo. It can carry 400 tonnes of hydrogen and 110 tonnes of oxygen, although this would not be fully loaded for most of its missions. As I've already noted, the piece of magic that makes the Scorpion viable is the Serpent Engine devised by Alan Bond. It is powered by a nuclear fission reactor, which first thermally heats the hydrogen propellant indirectly through a series of heat exchangers. Come on, it's an Alan Bond engine, of course it has heat exchangers. But once this heating is reached its limits, the hydrogen is further heated by an electric arc heater, with the electrical power coming from a generator that is also powered by the nuclear reactor, which means it can produce an effective exhaust velocity of over 12.5 kilometers a second. That is 50% more than conventional nuclear engines. As you can see, it is a large and complex system. But can I add just a word of caution? Images like this can give the impression that it's further down the design route than it actually is. It is a fully worked out cycle, and all the parts are sized as shown here. But the real physical design of each of those components, the pipe sizing and the actual arrangement, involves a little artistic imagination. However, if it were ever to be made for real, I think this gives you a realistic impression of what it would be like. But the Scorpion is much more than just a rocket stage. As is made clear but just by looking at this picture, it has a substantial habitation facilities, and these are in two sections. There's a living area in the front and a work area at the hub, and these are separated by a 36-metre long tube. This enables the Scorpion to spin, and this provides artificial gravity which could be up to half a G. What you're seeing here is a spin of 1 revolution every 24 seconds, which gives about a third G. The orientation needed for this spin mode creates a problem, because in the living area we require a different orientation when the engine is thrusting and when we land the Scorpion on the moon from when we're spinning. And this problem is resolved by giving the habitation area the ability to rotate by 90 degrees. A second feature of this living area is that it is shielded from solar storm radiation. These storms can last for several days, so this protected area has to contain all the main habitation functions. It needs places to eat, to rest, to control the ship, and of course perform hygiene procedures. So let us start with a quick tour of the accommodation the Scorpion offers in this living area, starting with the wardroom on the upper deck. This is a place for the crew to eat, to relax, to hold meetings. This room was designed to be the social hub of the ship. Next to the wardroom is a small galley where the crew's meals can be prepared and meaningful discussions about the tragedy of personal lives can take place. There are 6 individual crew rooms with about double the volume of the sleep stations on the ISS, and these are configured so they can be used in a gravity environment. The lower deck has a general purpose activity area, and it includes workstations, supply storage, and 2 hygiene areas. It also has the medical facility, which can be folded out of the way when not in use, or set up in a sort of dentist chair mode for normal medical examinations, or set up as a flat bed, probably for something more serious. You probably don't want to see it in that configuration. And in the front of the habitation module is the flight deck or bridge, which is the main control centre for the ship. As we have seen, the living area is separated from the mains operation area by a 36-metre long corridor. In an emergency, the living area has a separate open roof life support system and can be sealed from the rest of the ship, giving the crew of 6 about 7 days to resolve any problems. The tube corridor leads to the operations hub, and it is here that much of the main spacecraft equipment is housed, such as the environmental control and life support systems and the power and data distribution centre. But most of this hub area is devoted to carrying payload, which was presumed to be in the form of International Space Station cargo transfer bags, and it can carry 320 of them neatly stowed as shown here. But if we were prepared to use floor space, there could be a lot more of them. As you can see from this cutaway, there is also provisions for carrying 8 equipment racks, again using the International Space Station standard. There is provision for these racks to be powered and cooled, so these spaces could be used to either just carry the racks as cargo, or they can be incorporated into the Scorpion system as an active part of the mission. You can also see the 6 mounting ports for carrying external payloads, and also the airlock and preparation area for conducting spacewalks. Which brings us to the outside, where you can see the entrance to the airlock with some steps which we're going to need when we reach the moon. This view also shows 2 of the 6 payload attachment points, and you can see that there are 2 manipulators to handle the external payloads. And you can see the cupola, which is where the crew can actually see what they're doing while they're doing that manipulation. The 2 box-like objects on the top are inspection satellites with cameras and other sensors. They are either held by one of the manipulators or they can free fly. I realised the importance of these after a paper I saw in the 2019 Washington International Astronautical Congress. And they are therefore a late edition, and this is the reason that they don't show on some of the images that I created earlier. On top of the cupola is the main docking port. This is where Skylon would connect to deliver payloads and propellant, and you can see the connections for receiving hydrogen oxygen. Here is a summary of what the Scorpion can carry. The total payload mass can be many hundreds of tons. This actually proved to work out rather well. As the payload mass increases, so when the Serpent Engine fires, the acceleration decreases. So when the loading on the berthing ports is looked at, we find it remains roughly constant regardless of the mass that is carried. The real limitation on the payload is the actual available space between the two propulsion pods. Anyway, we are now ready to look at what we can do with this capability. So let us start with the boring missions delivering large payloads to high Earth orbits. What we are seeing here is the build-up of a large 250-ton space station, which is carried up from the Earth in 10-ton chunks over some 25 Skylon flights. This is a giant communications hub with a megawatt power capability and is close to the concept originally envisaged by Arthur C. Clarke in his paper Extraterrestrial Relays, published in 1945, where he proposed orbital communication links using 3 large crewed stations. Once all the payload pieces have been attached and the Scorpion is fueled up, it can be inserted into geostationary transfer orbit. Once the Scorpion reaches geostationary orbit, it can then use its manipulators to build up the space station from the pieces it has brought up. This can take many months, as the Scorpion mission life is determined only by the supplies to support the crew, and of course the crew's patience. Once the station is complete, the Scorpion can return to Earth, leaving a crew of 3 on the space station to begin its operations. So, the Scorpion opens up all of Earth's space in a way that, for example, the Apollo didn't. I do not think many appreciate that the space dominated by Earth's gravity expands out to cover over 1 million kilometres. In our rush to get to moons and planets, we miss the importance of this huge territory. The megawatt communication station actually only uses half the Scorpion's maximum payload capability to geostationary orbit. So the Scorpion could deliver such space stations that are comparable to the International Space Station in size and mass anywhere in Earth space out to the Sun-Earth L2 point. But the question arises, would we want to? We have seen that the Scorpion, especially when some laboratory modules are added, is the equivalent to the International Space Station on its own. So permanent space stations are really only worthwhile when they are needed to be, well, permanent and have some specialist function like this communication platform. This general point about how the Scorpion would operate is a key issue when thinking about how the infrastructure is revised. Its inherent capabilities mean that wherever it can operate, it negates the need for small space stations. It can fly to any orbit of interest, spend as many months, even over a year at that place with as large a battery of experiments as anyone could wish for. So when fixed bases are established in the Scorpion Skylon infrastructure, they will be big. And by big, I mean 1,000 tons plus. And we're going to find that effect again as we now come to consider the Moon. The Moon is clearly an important target. And although Mars might be a more romantic target, from a hard-headed point of view, the Moon has as much scientific interest and is infinitely more important as a source of exploitable resources that we will need for the long-term expansion into space. And for those asteroid enthusiasts out there, yes, they're of interest too, of course, and the Scorpion can handle them as well, but I'm afraid in the interest of time, I'm not going to discuss that in this video. Let us start with what we can do by way of lunar exploration with just Skylon and the Scorpion, without any additional systems. Each lunar mission would take a month or two to prepare, with 52 Skylon flights delivering the propellants and payloads. A simple lunar mission would probably involve a direct from Earth orbit to a descent trajectory to the lunar surface without an lunar orbit intermediate step, although this is also a possible alternative. Because the thrust of the Serpent is not variable, and because later on we're going to be concerned with radiation exposure to any astronauts that we may have left on the moon, we make the final descent using a secondary oxygen-hydrogen propulsion system with a belly landing attitude. And using 4 engines as shown here also gives us an engine out capability over this critical manoeuvre. I should point out that because of radiation concerns when operating close to other inhabited space facilities, the Scorpion would require a secondary propulsion system regardless of this lunar landing role. What this role would add is a requirement for the engines to be throttleable. And thus we have the Scorpion on the lunar surface with 20 tons of payload and enough propellants to get us back to Earth orbit. This direct landing of the Scorpion is not the only option. The Anzu capsule that the Scorpion uses as a ship's tender and an escape system can also land on the lunar surface from lunar orbit. It does require a drop tank, which is mounted on the front port and jettisoned shortly before the landing, and so when the Anzu is on the surface it has almost a full tank, which gives it the capability to get back to lunar orbit. This is an important capability for the Anzu. It means that when the Scorpion lands on the moon, the Anzu gives the crew a second means to evacuate the vehicle in an emergency and get back to orbit. The way such missions might work is for the Scorpion to set up as a lunar orbit base. It would carry 2 Anzus, drop tanks and refueling facilities that could handle 13 missions and 12 surface experiment packs. The crew could then undertake 12 landings at different locations with crews of 2 or 3 people. This is double the landing sites of the entire Apollo program. The 13th landing capability is in the case of an emergency on the 12th. So this means that there is always an Anzu in orbit with the ability to rescue a stranded surface party. But these could only be Apollo-style quick landings, and the surface payload would actually be less than the later J-class Apollo missions, so no rovers, I'm afraid. So overall, I'm not sure this would be worth doing compared with the Scorpion direct to the surface missions, even though that only lands at one position. Such a mission would cost about $1.5 billion. Now, while that may sound expensive, it is no more than a single space shuttle mission and considerably less than a lunar mission using the Orion and SLS. And that 20 tons delivered to the lunar surface is certainly not to be sneezed at. With that sort of payload mass, you could easily set up a viable small lunar base. But would you want to? We're back with the habitation capability of the Scorpion negating small stations and bases problem. When the Scorpion lands, you have de facto established an International Space Station-sized lunar base. And it would take at least 5 flights to build a base that starts to match this Scorpion capability. And do you really want to do that by repeatedly visiting to the same location rather than visit 4 more places on the moon? These lunar landing missions are on the edge of the Scorpion's capability, as the 20 tons on the surface compared with the 450 tons into lunar orbit illustrates. That extra 5 kilometers a second really bites. Now, there are ways to increase the payload, the most promising being a refueling stop for the Scorpion in lunar orbit on the way home. However, this rapidly hits a second problem, as the external payload attachment ports have a moment capacity which limits the payload on each port to around 20 tons. And even then you have to be careful where the centre of mass is located. So even though there is much larger payloads that are theoretically possible, In practice, we will be limited to something like 150 tonnes in total. Still very nice, but we're starting to see limitations appear when we need to move to establishing a large lunar settlement that would enable serious permanent occupation and exploitation of the moon. There are any number of options to build an extensive lunar presence based on the Scorpion's Skylon infrastructure, and I discussed these in a paper I presented at the last Reinventing Space conference, which was held in 2019 in that wonderful city of Belfast. The option I explored in a bit of depth is shown here. The first point to notice is that it establishes two spaceports, one in low Earth orbit and another at the Earth-Moon L1 Lagrange point. The actual lunar landings are conducted by a specialised chemically propelled lander. This lander is supplied with oxygen at the lunar base, which has been obtained from lunar rocks, and then it is supplied with hydrogen at the L1 base, which has been shipped from Earth. This means far less hydrogen is used to land a ton of material on the moon's surface than is the case with the Scorpion, which makes a considerable improvement to the overall economics, despite being a lower level technology. The L1 base could be built and supported by the Scorpion, but with so much traffic, it starts to make sense to have a specialist, uncrewed stage, which is simply a more conventional rocket stage that still uses the Serpent Engine, but without any of the frills. I've called this stage the Taurus, and it has an extra 200 tonnes of payload to the L1 location. However, unlike the Scorpion, it needs a spaceport to load propellants and payload, so that is why we have that second spaceport in low Earth orbit. As you can see, this infrastructure could support 14 person bases, 2 of them, at a cost of about $500 million per person. Expensive, yes, but far cheaper than any other sensible proposal I have seen, and it has the capability for expansion, which then introduces scale economies that could progressively lower costs, actually quite substantially. Now, although we have introduced the new Taurus bulk cargo carrier, there is still a role for the Scorpion in transporting people. But 6 at a time is not going to cut it with so many people on the moon. So we need to expand the passenger capability. And to do that, I assume the use of 6-person passenger modules that attach to the payload ports. These are fully solar storm protected, and they have hygiene facilities and a galley, so the 6 passengers can sit out a storm of several days if needed. Each module would have life support equipment that would be required to supplement the core Scorpion system to account for those extra people on board. They also have the ability to free fly, so they can act as life rafts if the Scorpion needs to be evacuated. If 6 of these modules are added to the Scorpion, then the Scorpion now has the ability to safely carry 36 people to the L1 station. Well, my time is running short, so I will now leave the moon because we certainly want some time to look at interplanetary flight. When we talk about interplanetary, we of course think of Mars, and it is a very attractive target, boosted by those alluring images from the many Martian probes that we have sent to its surface. Now, if these probes find evidence of indigenous life, well, that could slow things up a bit as we consider the risk and ethics of cross-contamination. But that aside, we are of course all itching to go there. But could I give a shout out for Venus and the asteroids as other potential targets? They have the advantage that the mission times are shorter, and they do not need any special developments, and here I'm particularly thinking of landers, to make the missions worthwhile. So they may prove to be better initial targets, even if only as shakedown missions before attempting the longer and more challenging Mars mission. Missions within Earth orbit can take months. For example, to reach the Sun-Earth L2 point on a minimum home and transfer orbit takes about 6 months. Although the Scorpion has the capability to do such missions faster using non-optimum trajectories, it still takes months. The internal storage space in the hub can carry supplies the crew need for missions of up to 7 or 8 months, which should cover almost all Earth space missions. And this is where the limit I set for the lunar surface mission comes from. However, interplanetary missions will take years, and therefore we need to find space for more supplies. What we have here is an estimate for a 6-person Mars mission, which comes to 35 tons. And as we see, that requires 2 logistics modules, which are very similar to the Italian logistic modules that the Space Shuttle used to support the International Space Station. But if we're going to go to Mars, we're going to not just want to stay in orbit, so we need a lander. Now, there's many ways to skin that particular metaphoric cat, but I've gone for a boring conventional 3 stages, 1 for descent and 2 for ascent, all using nitrogen tetroxide and hydrazine propellants. It's very similar to the lander NASA outlined for the post-Apollo program. The special trick here is that the final stage that carries the crew is a modified Anzu capsule, and in that role it can carry 3 people. For the Mars mission, I assumed the Scorpion would carry 2 landers, so 2 surface missions could be conducted and all 6 crew get to experience the Martian surface. And to be honest, it also helps with the balance. So here we are, a Scorpion all kitted out to explore Mars. But here we hit a problem. Working through the mission mass history, we get a big oops. To leave low Earth orbit, we have a capability that is only 1.5 kilometers a second, and we need about 4. So where's the remaining 2.6 coming from? Well, one solution is to launch from the Earth-Moon L2 station, if we have established that. But if that is an assumption too far, there are 3 alternatives that enable a launch from low Earth orbit. One is to use drop tanks, but this would mean that the Scorpion would need to have designed to carry these drop tanks from the start, and this is less trivial than it sounds. I have actually looked at the design that I'm showing you here, and I could not find a convincing way to modify it to carry these extra tanks. So I fear the design would have to be radically revised in order to accommodate these. The second way, which is probably the easiest to implement, is just to use another Scorpion as a booster. No modifications or new kit needed. The third way assumes that we have developed the Taurus, and that stage can send 2 Scorpions together on their way to Mars. I rather like this last option, as it incorporates one of the features I liked about the post-Apollo plans. NASA proposed to launch a fleet of 2 spacecraft so that they could support each other and provide an emergency means of return should one spacecraft fail. This reliability issue is important. Every proposal I have seen to send humans to Mars assumes we've built a special spacecraft to do it. However, if you look back at the pioneering sea voyages of the past, they never undertook them in a new design of ship. They used an old proven design and more often than not an old proven ship. Why add to the many risks of exploring the unknown away from any possible support by doing it in what is effectively an unproven X-plane? By the time the Scorpion does this mission, it will have been completely proven, with a long fleet history and hopefully all the bugs and design goofs sorted out. But what about the lander? This is new, and it's a very difficult and technically challenging part of the mission. Well, one approach I rather like is to make a test lander that can prove at least the descent is safe and replace the upper stage with a small habitat. A Taurus could deliver 6 of these to Mars orbit, meaning that if all goes well, we would have 6 test flights to prove the key features of the lander. We would have 6 surface bases to reconnoitre attractive landing sites before we arrive, and 6 small habitats to extend the Martian surface stay time when the crewman crew does arrive. What's not to like? So a 2-ship fleet could deliver 4 landers for 4 surface missions, each with a surface stay time of around a week using the small habitats. That would mean 12 people would have walked on Mars, as many as walked on the Moon as a result of the Apollo program. Well, I hope you have enjoyed this romp through some of the missions that a vehicle like the Scorpion could achieve. The point here is not the specific Scorpion design, but a more general point about what we have the capability to do if we have the desire to do it. I think this underlying technical capability that humanity now possesses in astronautics has a potential that far surpasses what has become the accepted doctrine, even in apparently adventurous enterprises like SpaceX and Blue Origin. Anyway, what do you think? Thank you for watching.
Great talk, Mark. Great talk, Mark. Can you unmute yourself now, please?
Yep, I'm unmuted and ready to go.
Brilliant. Okay, everyone, this part of the meeting is going to be recorded, as was made clear when you registered. So I'm just going to start the recording now. We're going to go to questions for Mark. So if you'd like to either attract my attention on the video, or you could please feel free to switch your video on and in the chat as well.
I think you have one from Alexander Osis.
Alexander, if you have a question, do you want to unmute yourself and ask it?
Fascinating presentation. I have one question about technology readiness levels.
Mm-hmm.
Do you envisage, so because this is naturally a very complex system, as most space systems are, and it's comprised of many subsystems. So do you have an envisaged technology readiness level development roadmap in mind for such technology?
Not a roadmap, no. If I can point to the original JBIS paper, an awful lot of that paper is discussing the technological feasibility, which can be done in two ways. A lot of the Scorpion is actually using not only technology that we have, but actual components we have. So an awful lot of it is off-the-shelf engineering from components. The bits that aren't, like the Serpent Engine, I've gone back and pointed out where we didn't do the development. It's never a case that someone found you couldn't do it. It's a case that a development path that was started was then stopped for normally political reasons. So everything that I can find on the Scorpion that I've looked at, I can either argue we've already got it, or we could have had it had we developed these programs and not just dumped them in the waste paper basket, which is really a message of stop cutting programs that are technologically promising for political reasons, which is what's happened in all the missing technologies. And if you go to the paper, you'll find I've individually pointed out where those technologies we should have but haven't got come from, and my arguments for that.
Okay, yeah, I couldn't agree more on that. It's so frustrating so many times when things have been cut, as you say, political reasons, often quite short-sighted reasons. Anyway, thank you for your answer.
I'll just give an example of that. In the Serpent Engine, there is a liquid lithium loop. In fact, two of them, that gets the heat from the reactor out into the wider heat exchangers, which are using hydrogen and helium. I thought, well, liquid lithium are used in terrestrial reactors, but we don't have a space view for that. I discovered, not in the NERVA program, but in another program that NASA had going around 1970, they were developing liquid lithium loops for space reactors, because that's how they were going to power their space stations, with nuclear reactors. So even technologies that were in the Sabre engine, the Serpent engine, were there, mostly dating back to the 1960s and being developed.
Thank you.
Right. Next question, Robert Law.
Thanks, Mark. That's absolutely fascinating. The question I wanted to ask you was about when it's been assembled in Earth orbit, are you saying that you're going to need about 50 flights of Skylon to do that?
To assemble a Scorpion, you need 28 flights.
Yeah, right.
And they are, again, if I can point to the JBIS paper, they're identified in the paper to show the sequence. And you do need a sort of construction spine while it's being built. I couldn't find a way of building it by itself. So you do need that construction spine. The 50 missions, the 50 Skylon missions are when you're doing a mission. And that's needed mostly just to bring up propellant. So an awful lot of those Skylon flights are just bringing up hydrogen propellant. And it's just a matter of till you've got the tanks full. It sounds a lot, but when you look at the costs of Skylon in that context, and it wasn't the lowest Skylon cost, you can argue, it still turns out cheaper than launching one SLS. So it's just a different way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
Great. Mark Perman next.
Hi, Mark. Have you considered the use of a big dumb launcher like the Starship proposal instead of a Skylon and figured that into the calculations?
Right. I do cover that subject in some depth in the talk I gave to BIS Italia. So I would point to that video on the BIS YouTube channel. The short answer is when I started this 8 years ago now, the big launchers didn't exist except the SLS, and that was clearly going to be way too expensive. I'm not sure about Starship because that doesn't look to be configured to be a bulk carrier. It's designed that what the Scorpion is doing, Elon Musk is thinking his Starship is going to do by itself. You just refuel the Starship. Not so sure about that, particularly going out to Mars. But anyway, that's the view. What the new Glenn from Blue Origin is interesting. If it were there and it were cheap enough, I would use it. But it's only 40 tons and the diameter is not that much bigger. I don't know what New Glenn is going to be, but you can envisage heavy lift vehicles with sort of Saturn V type capabilities. And you would design the Scorpion to be different. Depending on the cost ratio between the heavy lift and the Skylon is which one you carry the propellant up in might alter. Again, I go on it for about 20 minutes in that video. I would draw your attention to that with all the subtleties brought in. But for the purpose of the constraints in the study, I just use Skylon, and that works. If you had a heavy lift vehicle that was matched to Skylon, you do get a better working infrastructure. So if I were ruling the universe and had all the money, I would have both a heavy lift vehicle and a Skylon. Maybe the Skylon you make slightly smaller, and that is the optimum way of getting a link between Earth and space. But if you can only afford one, you have to have the Skylon.
Could I ask a further question?
Mm-hmm.
Had you thought about solar power satellite construction using the Scorpion?
Not in detail, but the payload to geostationary orbit is about 500 tons. And so long as you could package it to fit in that space, and again, if I were redesigning it from scratch and had a full design team and we could optimize, you'd probably find you'd make more space around that cargo carrying area to utilize the sort of 500 ton capability. So not in detail, but certainly it's as good as I've seen. And I think it would work better than the NASA reference proposal that they had in 1970. But again, if you're going down that line, it's crying out for a heavy lift vehicle to support it.
Yeah.
I see a question from Griff Ingram in the chat section. In the case of 2 Scorpions, would there be any problem of neutron cross-contamination, as this was worried about in the post-Apollo 3 Nerva Mars ship? I don't think there would be. When they are linked like that, the reactors would be, the propellant would be in the storage lockers, so there's not much getting out. And so there's no danger of them affecting one another to any significant degree. And you actually, for that mission, you could actually launch them with the reactors having not been activated, so the reactors are completely cold, and then only activate the reactors once you've separated. But to be honest, I think with the shielding that's involved and everything, I think that would be that wouldn't be an issue. And I see Steve Salmon has put up the YouTube link to the BIS Italia talk, which has only had 80 views so far, so I expect that to rise after this one. I've got to point out it is a different talk from the one I gave the BIS and this one. Bob, I think Mike Bryce is looking for questions.
I was just going to say before we do Mike, sorry, we have a previous question from Keith Burrow. He's asking about the centre of mass for artificial gravity. He says, would it be an issue considering the disposition of payload, including crew movement, not placing the centre of mass always at the same place?
I don't think that the precise, you don't have to get it down to the millimetre because you're not trying to dock or anything. So you'd have to be paying attention to it. The real worry I've got is that the inertia ratios for stable spin are getting a bit iffy at some propellant loading positions. It's fine when it's fully loaded. It's not quite so good when it's sort of getting towards an empty fuel tank. One of my tricks is that you can actually get quite a bit of movement of the centre of gravity by manipulating the 4 landing legs and the manipulator arms. So you can actually put a little bit of active control into the centre of mass, which, fingers crossed, would give you a bit of extra stability. I'm not going to claim I proved that down to the wire. So I don't think you need precise control of the centre of mass, but you can't ignore it either. You can't just play footloose and free with it.
Okay. Sorry, Mike, over to you.
Okay, thanks. With the Skyliner flights, I think Skyliner is designed to be an automated system, but would there be crew on some of the flights, or would it be an automated system to build Skyliner?
This is a common thing I'd rather hope we put to bed. We used to get that a lot on Skylon, and so we had a genius, and I don't know whether I thought of it or Natalie Aldred, who was the PR person at the time. We were in the same office, or whether it just was one of these things that comes out mutually. But we had a brilliant idea of making a short video with Brian Blessed doing the narration, showing how we would support the space station with crew. Right. It's quite a good little video. It's still on YouTube, but you might have to search a bit to find it.
Okay.
It's actually got Brian Blessed, who doesn't swear once in the whole thing. In fact, there's some comments about it's hardly Brian Blessed because he really did turn himself down. And within about 7 months, we found all the suggestions that Skylon couldn't fly people disappeared.
Right.
Yes.
So actually building the Scorpion. Would you require astronauts to do that?
No, sorry. To build it, yes, there would be a small crew needed. So when I say a construction spine, what I really meant was a construction spine with a small salute level, maybe mere level habitation attached to it,
Yeah.
Which can house the crew long enough until the front habitation, because you start building the Scorpion with that front habitation module. So that actually quite early on can be kitted out and used by the assembly crew as additional place.
Okay.
So yes, there is a crew, and they essentially progressively inhabit the Scorpion that they're building.
Right.
Which means all your life support and everything's been checked out thoroughly before you actually put a flight crew on it.
Okay, thanks.
A little comment about no problems with the volume if Brian Blessed did the voiceover. No, there isn't, because I did the sound recording. And Steve's put up the link for the Brian Blessed. God, Steve,
Oh, okay.
you've got to hand it to him, haven't you?
You get this. You get the lollipop today, right? Who's got a question? Hold up your hand, or I don't believe that's the last question. Anybody? Oh, here we go. Steve Salmon.
Hi, Mark. Hi there again, everyone. Hi there. Yeah, you may have said it in the video, and for some reason I may not have caught it. What is the maximum crew capacity for Scorpion?
Right. Okay. The minimum is I assumed was 3, which is why there's 3 stations at the control scene in the bridge. But there is capacity of the habitation module for a total of 6. So there's 6 berths. And when I've sized the emergency life support and that sort of thing, it's all designed around 6 people. It doesn't really feature much in the design, but if you were doing it for serious, you would have to also do the case of 12 in an emergency, so that when you're doing that Mars flight and you've got 2 of them, that one of the crew can leave their ship and live probably not very comfortably in the other ship, but at least you can get them home. So 6 comfortably, 12 at a pinch. But if you need more, then you attach those passenger modules, and then you can take the total capacity up to 36 in the passenger modules. And if you're counting the people at the front, you can go to 42. No, yes, 42, yeah. Which would make it quite chummy and full, I would imagine. And each of those modules, there's a little crew cabin for everybody in the modules. There's there's a small galley, there's hygiene. So if you're stuck, the 6 people can actually live in there for a time. But so the actual crew ranges 6 in normal mode, up to 36 if it's been turned into a passenger carrier.
Great, thank you.
I've got to add there that if you really had that thing I was showing getting to the moon and it grew a bit, I think you then would make a specialist passenger carrying version of the Scorpion, maybe with a sort of 100 passengers or something like that. So I would consider using that passenger module, which is not very elegant, as a temporary fix while you're building up to a sort of a serious passenger transport capability.
Great. Next question. Please hold your hand up or put something in the chat. We got Malcolm. Do you want to unmute yourself, Malcolm?
Hi there. An interesting talk, Mark. Sorry, the volume in my end was very low, so I'm fairly sure I didn't catch most of what you were saying.
Sorry. I think we'll try and make sure that it goes on the BIS YouTube channel so you can...
Such is life. Don't worry about it. I can watch it on a repeat or something, and hopefully it'll be improved. Anyway, I was thinking, you said about a manned, six-person manned ship. Am I wrong in thinking that if you're just moving goods from Earth to Mars and it was like basically commuting back, one is you wouldn't need a crew for that journey, and that would be an ideal situation for an automated sort of ship. And if you've already got a personnel on Mars and they have the ability to get into orbit, they just dock with, an unload or whatever. I mean, I'm just in my ignorance. I'm just sort of going with this.
No, you're quite right, and I did mention it, but didn't show a picture of it because I haven't created one yet. That Taurus vehicle, the pure rocket stage version of it, can put what is it? It's nearly 200 tons into Mars orbit and come back empty. But so that is it's a sensible option. Why I don't think you start with something like the Taurus is if you've got a stage like the Taurus, then you need a spaceport to manage it. So it's actually easier to start with the Scorpion. And the other thing is that when you are sort of at the cutting edge and you're going places for the first time and you don't have infrastructure at the other end, you need the crew and the manipulators and all the things so you can do stuff when you've arrived. So I see the Scorpion as the first ship because it's the one that can go where where no man has gone before, to use a phrase, and it's already kitted out to do things. Right. If you've got a pure rocket stage like the Taurus, you need something at the other end to make it work.
Right. Okay. I had a follow-on, if I may, a follow-on comment, which in fact I think you may have indirectly answered. I was thinking that once you have one ship, it really is a proof of concept. And then very quickly, I would have thought immediately, you need a small fleet of ships. As in one is not really, I think you'd want one going to Mars while one is coming back and one is being prepared and so on and so forth. So
yes. Again, in the JBIS paper, I did cover that.
All right. Okay.
Or was it in the video? I think maybe in the first video. What I've always done for costing purposes is assume that you've made a fleet of 5.
All right.
And because they don't need spaceports, you can make the fleet as big as you want. It doesn't actually impact anything.
Right.
So yes, I think you would have a fleet, if only for safety reasons. Because if you've got a Scorpion stuck somewhere, how are you going to get to the crew to get them off? You need another Scorpion to get there. So yeah, I do think you would have a fleet, not just the one vehicle. But it doesn't have to be an enormous fleet to have an immense impact on things. Right, I see someone's asking about the paper I keep mentioning. I've got to say it's a JBIS paper, so if you're not a subscriber to JBIS, it is on ResearchGate. Otherwise, I don't think there is a sort of public domain link to that paper yet. I think that one I'm going to say is coming, in that I hope to put that into the new. There's a new copyright thing for JBIS, and I'm hoping to make it a gold paper, and then I will try and put it on my company website. But I don't think there is a way of getting the paper at the moment if you're not a JBIS subscriber or.
Sorry, Mark, I think there is. If you do a search on Google for JBIS Scorpion, you'll come to a page, and it will offer to sell you the paper on its own. I can't remember how much it was. I think it was £5 or something. It might be £10, something like that.
Griff has put it in the chat that you can buy JBIS past papers direct from the BIS. Yes, so you can buy it. As I say, my intention is to make it a gold paper so it can become public domain. But I actually have to pay the society to make that happen.
Okay, we'll do Mark and then we'll do Mike.
Just a very quick plug. Join the BIS. Get your subscription in for JBIS.
Yeah, I would. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, did Michael have a question?
Yes, so just unmuting. On the go back to Skylon again. What's the projected turnaround time for each Skylon vehicle from landing to launch again? I'm thinking how much time it would take to actually, get the components up to build the Scorpion and that.
You wouldn't have one Skylon, but you can have a fleet doing it. But the turnaround time for Skylon, which we got pretty convincing argument for it being about 48 hours from to a relaunch. The majority of that is actually inspecting the skin to see if it's been hit by micrometeorite or debris. And if that could be automated and speeded up, you could make it faster. And we did look at it again, thinking more from maybe a military perspective where you really wanted a fast turnaround. You could get that down to certainly well under a day, and you could have it ready to go and fuel. So you could have it if you planned your fleet right, you could have it on a 6-hour notice. Yeah,
I was thinking back to the time that the space shuttle development, when they were talking about very short turnaround times, which never really happened, unfortunately.
Well, it didn't happen for a number of reasons, and the main one is they didn't build a lot of the things. If people take the figures that came for that original 2-stage reusable shuttle, and then assume that was going to work for the expendable shuttle that they actually built, and the two are chalk and cheese. And it just did not really. For a start, they didn't design it for fast turnaround. In the end, we designed Skylon for the fast turnaround.
Right. Okay.
So it's built in that's it. And the Delta Clipper, the DCX that they built and tested in the desert. It's not a launch vehicle, but it was intended to illustrate points about the launch vehicle. It was intended to prove two things. One is vertical rocket landing, which is the spectacular stuff. The other thing they were trying to prove is that they could do a turnaround in 6 hours.
Right.
Because that's what their military funders were looking for, and they did prove they could do that. So if you design the vehicle right, you can get much faster turnarounds than the shuttle.
Okay, thanks.
Right. Any more questions?
Oh, there's one on the coming up on the chat. Okay, I'll read it out and try and answer it. At a spin of 1 rotation per 24 seconds, if you drop from the center down the corridor, apart from hitting the walls due to Coriolis, you would hit at 14 meters, the same as a fall from 10 meters on Earth. What prevents this? I think you've answered it. It's the Coriolis force. If you're going down that tunnel and you're not holding on to the ladder, you're going to hit the walls and slow down. I haven't done that sum. I'm assuming it's right. I'm kind of a bit surprised because the acceleration at the end is at start is very slow. But I don't think you couldn't drop that far down because you'd be constantly hitting the wall on the cylinder. But I guess if you really wanted to commit suicide, worked at it, you might be able to manage it. But I have to say the intention is actually when I did the little bit of stressing I stressed it to be once every 20 seconds and give half a G at the hab end in the living area. Exactly what spin rate and what gravity rates, what spin rates we can tolerate and what gravity we need to compensate for the effects is both those are currently just simply unknown. So
okay, we've also in the comments we got a note from Mike Crawforth saying that Rolls are currently working on developing nuclear space propulsion, both thermal and electric. Mike, are you there? Do you work for Rolls-Royce?
I do. Yep.
Fine. Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, there's not too much to say. If you Google, UK Space Agency, Rolls-Royce, you'll see the press releases, and that's the public available information. The question is not the willpower or the technology. As Mark's covered today, the technology exists. We can do it. We have the capability within the UK to do it. The question is around money, finance, and the end use customers. So it's a political question at the minute rather than a technological one. But we are working towards the solution as we stand today.
I certainly think, and again, this is in the first video, nuclear thermal power, as per the original NERVA, where you get about 800 meters a second, it's a bit iffy whether you're gaining enough from a conventional stage to make it worthwhile. With the Serpent engine, where Alan's combined electrical and heating variants into the single engine, and you get this 12.5%, which is 50% more, it becomes a complete game changer. There's I can't prove it analytically, but there seems to be a threshold between those two numbers when the viability of the vehicle, what it can do, the whole robustness, the ability to put in things that are not necessarily needed on every mission. I mean, Scorpion is a general purpose spacecraft, like a family car. You don't use everything on the family car every time. You don't use all the seats and everything, but it makes sense because you've got that sort of margin of performance. And I think that is what I found that the Serpent engine gave, is a margin of performance that takes you out of just the usual trying to make a rocket right on the edge of what you can achieve. I wish Rolls-Royce luck, because on all these things, I think we have to embrace nuclear power for space. And I think the argument for nuclear power in space and the argument for nuclear power on the ground are quite different. Again, if I can point you to the BIS Italia talk I gave, nuclear power is one of the subjects that I covered in that talk.
Great. Any more questions? Okay, so it's just Mark Perman. Mark. Yep.
This is a question not for Mark Hempsell, but for Mike Crawforth. Mike, are you the person to talk to get us a talk on Rolls-Royce's work on nuclear power and in space?
Yeah, absolutely. I can send you my details after this. We're starting to get out there in the public domain, hence attending talks like this. But yeah.
Magic. Please send us your details, and we'll chat online.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That would be interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so do we have any more questions? So because there's still so many of you, I have to page through all who are attending, so just to see if there's any hands up. No. So Ian Johnson says, great concept. Hope you inspire the younger generation to run with it.
That's the idea.
Okay, well, everyone, I think in that case, as there are no more questions, I think we'll end it there. So it's so great to see so many of you, and we kept so many right to the end of the questions and answers. So a lot of you, or almost all of you, have asked to be kept in the mailing list, which is great. So we'll be updating the mailing list, and the next one will go out in about 3 weeks' time, just to let you know what events we've got on. Meanwhile, please go to the BIS website, bis-space.com. Click on Get Involved, or you can actually have a look at our other technical projects from there. Really exciting, and if we can persuade you to join, and I can see from the data that's coming in that more and more of you are actually joining in between meetings. So it's if you've just joined, it's great to have you. I hope you get your first space flight or JBIS or whatever it is you've ordered. You'll absolutely love it, I promise. And if you're anything like me, you'll be binge watching the videos in the members area. So everyone, apart from the few, I'd like my crew to stay on, and we'll just have a quick wash-up meeting, and Mike Crawford, if you want to stay on as well, and we'll just get your details as well while you're here. And for everyone else, thank you so much for attending. Great to see you.
Thanks very much, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
Brilliant.
Branches, people stay
Great,
on.
as always. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much.